We've been taking a look at the complexities of representation in terms of gender and how um, social constructions influence our perceptions, and how feminism exposes that a lot of our understanding of gender is a social construct. And today I wanted to take a look at art created by women and how it's representing the human experience. And as we go through this, we're going to take a look at several artists of the 20th century. And I want you to think about which artist is best at representing the human experience, right? The idea of transcending not just art for women, but art for humanity. Again, getting back to some of the ideas that we talked about with Bell Hooks when we were covering the civil rights, where Bell Hooks calls out Charlie Rose for suggesting that all of her books deal with race. And she said, well, in some way, shape, or form, all books deal with race. Or taking a look at Simone de Beauvoir, who examines how literature created by women is considered women's literature rather than just literature, right? So we're taking a look at those ideas, and as we go through today, I want you to think about which artists can transcend that idea and just represent things that anyone can identify with. And so it's a way of framing the discussion in order to, excuse me, think about um, art created by women in a different way, thinking about them as just artists rather than simply women artists. I wanted to start with Georgia O'Keeffe. I would say that she's probably the main artist, particularly for women, right? But just one of the main artists of the 20th century in general. My kind of overview of O'Keeffe is the following. She wanted to be an artist since she was 12. She attended the Art Institute of Chicago from 1905 to 1906. In 1907, she moved to New York, where she became familiar with the works of Rodin, Matisse, and her eventual husband, Alfred Stieglitz. Influenced by her husband's works, her husband was a photographer. She became very interested in photography. She liked the ability of the telephoto lens to draw closer attention to specific elements. Her up close paintings abstract the subject to provide deeper insights into ordinary elements that are often overlooked. And so, what we're going to see with O'Keeffe's works is they're going to be photorealistic, but in some ways, she's going to keep getting closer and closer, like a telephoto lens, magnifying whatever she's painting to a point where it almost becomes abstract. And so, it's both photorealist in a sense, and it's also abstract in a sense. And so, I want you to think about those particular ideas moving forward. Um, Here's one of her main works of art. This is the cow's skull, red, white, and blue. And what we see within this particular work is, again, the idea of photorealism. This is before she really starts getting closer and closer. But she's also heavily influenced by the Southwest and the ideas of enduring symbols. And so, what we see within her works are going to be these enduring symbols. And a couple of quotes to think about in reference to this specific work that she calls attention to. She says, I feel that there is something unexplored about women that only a woman can capture. And so, in some ways, we can suggest that, well, maybe art created by women is something only for women, right? And but in another way, I think that she's representing a way of seeing the world, and her way of seeing the world is something that can be impactful, important to the ongoing discussion of the human condition. She says this about the skull. She says the weathered cow skull represents the enduring spirit of America. And so what she's looking for is this sense of continuity. And so she juxtaposes the cow skull, which is something that's kind of an enduring element in of itself. The skull's going to last for a long time. With the red, white, and blue that encases it, and so something that's a symbol of kind of an enduring spirit of the cow, but it's also a symbol of death and decay as well. And so you have that duality of death mixed with kind of endurance and life and this ongoing spirit, and then that's encased within the symbol of the United States flag, which is a symbol of freedom and democracy and equality, the hopes and aspirations of the United States. And she says this about the skull, right? The skull is not about death, it's about life. And so it's this idea of endurance and moving forward and progress. Here we see some of her more typical images. A lot of what she paints are flowers, and she continues to get closer and closer to them. And so here we see a close up of the petal, and here's what she says about it. She says, "It's only by elimination that we get to the real meaning of things." And so part of what she's doing is she's really trying to explore something up close to understand it in a better way, right? In a clear way, in a more focused way. And so she really likes to hone in and focus on her subject in order to find deeper hidden truths that we normally don't see if on a superficial exploration. Here's another image. Again, we see some flower petals here, and this time it feels a little more abstract. We're not really sure if these are exactly flower petals or if they're just paint on a canvas with a kind of a flowing feel to them. But again, she's getting us closer and closer so that we have to concentrate our attention on the subject matter, things that we generally would ignore, and she's calling our attention to them. She's casting a spotlight on them, and this is a little bit different from our investigation of the civil rights movement and its art, where we see a similar call to attention, creating awareness within civil rights art. This one is calling our attention, but it's not necessarily as politically charged per se. It's getting us to think about things in a new way, right? And then what we gather from that investigation is going to be up to us, right? She says the following: When you take a flower in your hand and really look at it, it's your world for the moment. I want to give that world to someone else. Most people in the city rush around so. They have no time to look at a flower. I want them to see it, whether they want to or not. And so she's really interested in this idea of calling our attention to things that can be overlooked. And we can expand this out to have more of a political message if we so desire, thinking about how the rights, the equality of women are generally overlooked, or we can suggest that this is calling attention to some of the larger socio-economic problems or the injustices in the world. That another thing, but things that we tend to overlook. She's trying to give us kind of more awareness, call our attention to it. She says this. This isn't specifically about black irises, but it's just a quote that she has that can help us to have greater insight into her art. She says, "I decided that if I could paint that flower in a huge scale, you could not ignore its beauty." And so, how often do we go through life and, first of all, really stop and appreciate the beauty around us, the flowers, the sunset, whatever the case may be? She's getting us to really think about the beauty that surrounds us in a very ugly, sometimes vile, degrading, horrific, brutal world. She's calling our attention to the beauty that is actually around us. And I think that something like this is necessary, particularly in an art and propaganda class, which sometimes does focus on some of the brutality and ugliness of the world to understand it better. She kind of gives us a pause for a moment and to think about the beauty that is actually out there. And I think it's important to have that balance. Otherwise, we can tend to think that the world is only ugly or only brutal. And she suggests that it's much more nuanced and complicated than that. She says, another quote from her, she says, I often painted fragments of things because it seemed to make my statement as well or as better as the whole could, right? So again, there's a purpose, there's a focus to her zooming in with a kind of almost a telephoto lens that she has as an artist with her eye to call attention and to create awareness. This is another image that she does, showing us again another element of the flower, but an abstraction of the flower to call attention to the beauty of its colors, the beauty of the lines and the shading that are there. But as we think about going back just for a second to Georgia O'Keeffe's works, is that call to attention, right? That creation of awareness, something that's just only for women, or is it something that men can appreciate and understand and need to have greater awareness of as well, right? And we generally tend to think of flowers associated with femininity, but again, we can take a look at her concept of flowers and perhaps apply that to other avenues, other social developments or other concepts, and think about what else are we ignoring, what else might we be missing, what else might we need to have a greater focus. I wanted to also take a look at another major artist of the 20th century, Frida Kahlo. She suffered a serious accident, a bus accident in 1925, that left her injured at the age of 16. As a result of her injuries, she was unable to have children and had over 32 operations in her life. Her works mainly consist of self portraits. In them, she constantly questions her identity, and that's a reoccurring theme that we see within this class, right? Who am I? Why am I here? Where am I going? And how does propaganda shape that perception? Her works pose questions like, who am I in the world? Am I a Mexican? Am I a woman? Am I a wife? Am I an artist? And how do these, difficult, complex terms of identity, how are they, sometimes oversimplified? And so she's looking for kind of a deeper understanding of the individual that she sees within herself. While some call her a surrealist painter, meaning that her works kind of border between things that are real and unreal, she said that she painted her own realism. And so she's painting her reality. Many of her paintings show harsh, unmitigated pain, something that Kahlo experienced nearly every day since her accident. Some of her images are going to be pretty brutal. For instance, this one she painted after her accident. So here we see her accident happened in Detroit. And so here she is at the Henry Ford Hospital. That's indicated by around the bed. And then we see her the connection to a miscarriage. And then she has different elements, right? Different parts of her identity. And in the background, you see the industrial Detroit, but it's kind of a barren landscape to show the kind of the barrenness of the modern industrial world. And then as she lays on the bed, she's connected, right, through some type of vein to different elements, right? A flower or a pelvis or a machine or, other parts of the anatomy or a baby or a snail. And so again, what she's doing here, she's looking at what connects her within the world and how do these connections shape her identity, her understanding of herself. And as she struggles with her own body and recovery and miscarriages, struggling to have control over that, she's trying to understand who she is and what this all means and how this helps to shape her understanding of herself. What we see here is an interesting juxtaposition with Frida. This is a common motif that we see with her art, where she shows a self portrait, but then she also replicates, right, that self portrait. And what we see here is there's two Fridas, and they're connected in kind of an interesting sort of very graphic, almost harsh sort of way, through connecting through the veins and the heart. And so again, the idea of the heart is something that connects her to others, whether that otherness is the world around her, society, or in this case, different identities that she has. And so here she is dressed in a traditional Mexican dress, And then she's also portraying herself in more of a modern dress as well. And so the question is, how much does tradition influence her understanding of herself, and how much does this heritage continue to shape her vision of the world? And as you notice, that the one of the veins is cut, and it's now the blood is spilling out onto her dress, which gives more of a graphic feel. And she constantly struggled with her identity and what that means. And she says this, not specifically about this particular work of art, but it's something that she says in general that I think does pertain to this work and helps us give greater insight. She says, "My paintings carries with it the message of pain." And so part of the pain that we see within her art is the pain of trying to understand who you are in the modern world, in an environment that is constantly trying to, other forces, external forces, are trying to tell you who you are. And so how that causes further pain through confusion and through trying to sift through the complexities of the propaganda. This one is probably one of her more famous works of art, her self portrait with a monkey. Again, she's thinking about her identity as a woman, her identity as a Mexican, her connection with, as a woman, to nature, the nature around her. And she is depicting herself as, and beautiful, and but not necessarily beautiful in a Hollywood traditional sort of way, right? And so she's trying to see who she really is as we peel back the layers of identity. She says, quote, "I never paint dreams or nightmares. I paint my own reality," right? And so some of her works seem a little bit, I don't know, like claustrophobic or unreal or bizarre, particularly with the one that she painted after her accident. But she's painting how she sees herself and struggling to understand. And that's, for her, that's one of the greatest ventures, is to understand who she is in this world. This one she painted after her divorce to a very famous Mexican painter, Diego Rivera. And what she does is, after the divorce, she chops all her hair off. And on the back wall, it says in Spanish, "I thought it would be beautiful if I cut my hair off. Now I cut my hair off and I'm ugly." And so what we see here is, again, she's trying to understand who she really is in this world, as she identifies herself with her husband, "Am I a wife?" Right? But now that that relationship has ended, who am I now? And so she's dressed in more masculine clothes. She has her hair cut short like a man. And so she's struggling to understand what is womanhood and how does that relate to the understandings of masculinity, right? So similar to what we've seen with some of the theorists, cultural theorists out there with feminism, struggling to understand, if you remove the overarching definitions that men have used to define womanhood, right? If you remove men from saying you can't define women anymore, and women start to take that mantra themselves and start to define themselves, then the question is, how do you do that, right? The first kind of knee-jerk reaction is, well, I want to be powerful just like a man. So you start to see a movement towards, women that show themselves or represent themselves as, the exact opposite of, the feminine weakness. But then again, that produces some complexity, because that's not really a new definition or a new understanding of womanhood. That's just inverting the already existing traditional definition of womanhood. So again, you have those complexities of what is a woman. If we remove the stereotypes, remove the social constructs, what does that actually mean? And so she's struggling with that within her art, to understand who I am. And again, we want to think about this. And I mean, I guess we could be a little bit dismissive and just say, well, she's struggling as a woman to understand who she is. But if she was a man and investigating the self, right, such as Rembrandt, who is probably the painter that painted himself the most, or Van Gogh painted himself a lot as well. We generally don't think of them as masculine painters. We just think of them as painters who are trying to understand the human condition. With Rembrandt, we generally tend to think of him as in deep introspection. We need to go within in order to understand who we really are in our relationship to God. And with Van Gogh, we see kind of the investigation of the inner mind and the inner reality of the artist. And so, can we apply a similar narrative or understanding to Frida Kahlo's work as she goes within to try to understand who she is? Is that only to understand who she is as a woman, or is that to understand who she is as a human being, right? And so again, we have that complexity that's being teased out within her work. This was one of the dreams that she had, where we have a funnel that's filtering a lot of carcasses that down. But again, it relates to her feeling incapacitated. Here we see that she's stricken in bed, she's immobilized, and then she has this kind of sense of death that surrounds her. And then on the backscape here, we see something that could be in a sci-fi movie on a different planet or something. It kind of gives it a more of a surrealist feel to it. But it's a struggle that she is trying to understand. What is this modern world? What is this modern human experience? She says, quote, "The only thing I know is that I paint because I need to, and I paint whatever passes through my head without any other consideration." So again, she's just kind of investigating her own thoughts and her own ideas, and again, just kind of connecting the dots here a little bit. Is her investigation within her head just something that's typical for women, or is it something that can be something that's part of the larger human experience? Lee Krasner was the wife of Jackson Pollock, and so sometimes she's overlooked in that regard. But let's take a look at her art and see what message she has to say. Does she have something that is more relevant, and is that something that we can all kind of draw from? Krasner was employed as an artist by FDR's Works Progress Administration. She initially was influenced by Picasso's Cubism. She met Jackson Pollock at an art exhibition in 1941 and found him to be a living force within the art world. And that's how she defined him. Uh, Her relationship with Pollock proved to be difficult for her artistic career, as you can imagine, having someone that is a rock star within the art world, that's going to cast a rather large shadow. And so everyone else is going to kind of be in the shade of that artist. And so you can only imagine how difficult that was for her as an aspiring artist. However, his bouts with alcoholism and depression later shaped her works, and so a lot of her works are her understanding of, how do you deal with difficult people, how do you deal with difficult times, how do you deal with people that you love that are self-destructive, and how does this influence, you, right? She says, "My own image of my work is that I no sooner settle into something then a break occurs. These breaks are always painful and depressing, but despite them, I see that there's consistency that holds out. But it's hard to define." And so again, she's thinking about how to advance the art world, how to continue this ongoing discussion of where is art and where does it go. And she's constantly suggesting that this break is something that needs to happen, but it's always difficult and depressing as you work through the artistic process. This is another abstract expressionist work as she's trying to understand the world around her. We just see lines rather than shapes or shading. Objects that are represented, these are just lines and colors, again, to simplify the work and to focus more on the immediate connection between not necessarily ideas, but the feelings of the artist and the viewer. Martha Rosler is another key artist in the second half of the 20th century. She was born in Brooklyn. Her most recognizable works are photo collages, where she contrasts the domestic lives of women with war, repression, and politics. This is what her works generally look like. They're photo collages where she juxtaposes different images in order to focus on the obscenity of war. And that's going to be in the quote that I'll talk about in just a minute. But what we see here is a Vietnamese woman holding her dead child in her arms. And then that's going to be juxtaposed against the domestic kind of suburban space. And it gives us a different feel. If we see a lot of death and horror on the news, it feels horrific to us. It feels problematic, but it can be desensitized after a while. When you see so much brutality, so much horror, you just kind of tune it out, and then you just go numb to it. You kind of get used to seeing it, and what she's doing is she's placing it in a different context to give us a new meaning, new insight. And so it feels much more offensive. It feels much more problematic. And she says, quote, I was shocked and so enraged that our country, which has this wonderful idea of democracy, was doing this terrible thing in Vietnam. I wanted to make things to express the obscenity of war. And war generally tends to be a very masculine enterprise, right? Men generally the ones that are declaring war. They're the ones that are going off generally to fight in the wars, predominantly. And so it generally tends to be a very masculine dominant enterprise where women traditionally have been left on the home front to worry and to wait for the men to return home. And so what she's doing is she's taking a look at that kind of hyper masculinized image of war, and she juxtaposes that with more feminine images, and it produces an interesting contrast, a juxtaposition. Here we see this one is a commentary on the war in Iraq. You see that the bombing in the background with the soldiers burning Iraq, and then you have the dead mother and the dead child in the middle ground in their chairs, and in the foreground you have a woman who's talking on the phone, and here she's a model and she's posing, but she's also part of this, materialistic, superficial world. And so what happens often is the case is we generally have these larger socio-political issues that are happening within the world that we turn a blind eye to, that we tend to be unaware of. We kind of know about it, kind of the headlines of it, but we don't really know the humanity of it. We don't really know the personal lives that are affected, and the total human cost that goes into war, both in the lives of the soldiers and their families, and also the lives of the victims that are become casualties of war. And so she's calling attention to this to make us more aware of it, that we tend to be very superficial, and our superficiality, our going online or shopping, comes at a cost. Comes at a cost around the world, that we have a large imprint, a political imprint, that we have a bad history, a bad record of toppling governments and intervening in foreign affairs, um, to a point where we're harming domestic, citizens of these countries as well. And we tend to, as citizens, everyday citizens, we tend to turn a blind eye to it, pretend that we don't know about it, or we don't dig any deeper. And so she's calling attention to some of those atrocities. Here in red and white shades, similar idea, right? We see the bombing of Baghdad in the background, where George Bush, his campaign was called Shock and Awe, where he was going to just bomb Baghdad to the ground and then send in the troops to kind of pick up or go through the pieces that remained. And so it's kind of the obscenity of death and destruction. You can't bomb an entire city without killing civilians, and that obscenity with juxtaposed with a woman who is who looks as though she's walking on the runway. She's modeling her clothes, and then in a home, right, setting. And so she places all of her, or most of her works, within a domestic space to show that how war affects home life. It affects the home life of the soldiers and their families as they go to war, but it also affects the home life of those that were fighting, and disrupts their families. And as we think about this within a gospel context, right, families are the center of human relationships, and how that can be affected by political issues that we could with upon further investigation perhaps understand that we don't really need to go to as many wars as we tend to, right? We always tend to say that wars are about our protection, our defense, and in some cases that's true, and in some cases that's an oversimplification. That it's not really about our personal protection. It's about, other political issues that are on the outer peripheries. This is the last one I wanted to show you by Rosler. Similar idea, the photo montage. A very wealthy, or a very well dressed, I guess I should say, a model in the foreground, and then she kind of turns and looks on the runway, and then you have the point and shoot of the soldiers in the tank in the background, taking this woman and child, not necessarily shooting them, but disrupting their lives, and certainly causing a lot of emotional and psychological trauma. But the title suggests, right, the point and shoot of not just the gun of the soldiers, but it's also the point and shoot of the photographer who's taking the picture. And so getting us to think about, the as we go along watching our commercials and binge watching Netflix or YouTube or whatever the case may be, there's a lot of conflict going on in the world, and a lot of it we're part of as the United States, that we tend to ignore and just think, what, as long as I, get my latest iPhone update or the latest, whatever handbag or shoes, then I should be fine. And there's a lot more complexity to that. And so as we think about this, again, I want you to think about Rosler's works in terms of, is this just a message for women, right? Is she just speaking to women and saying, hey, war is terrible, they're this, kind of masculine domineering view of the world is problematic, or is she suggesting it's something, the war is something that we probably need to have a better understanding of, and how it affects the multiple dimensions of it. It's not just going out and killing the enemy soldiers. There's a lot that goes into war, both financially, but also in terms of human life, the soldiers and the victims that come along the way. Judy Chicago focuses more on the telling of the woman story of history, that women have been neglected, and its history is generally told through a male lens, that men have been the leaders, and so they've been the ones that have created the most social change and the developments of civilization. And so she questions that, and she calls attention to a lot of the advancements that women have made. She changed her name after the death of her father and husband to resist the male-dominated society where women take on the name of a man. And so, similar to the second wave feminism of the 1960s and 70s, and moving on into the 1990s with the third wave feminism, she's taken a look at her identity and how her identity has been influenced by a male-dominated world, and she's trying to find ways to take that back. She argues that women have not been adequately represented in Western history, and seeks to provide a voice for the influential women of the past. In 1974, she worked on her most famous work, The Dinner Party, with the participation of hundreds of volunteers. The work is a symbolic history of the women of Western civilization. And what we see within The Dinner Party is that this is a three-dimensional work of art. So it's more sculptural, although this is a table, and there's a lot of textile that goes into it. But what she does here with this three-dimensional image is she has a triangle shape, which historically is the representation of womanhood, and then on each of these sides she sets 13 placemats, which is symbolic, right? Thinking about the New Testament and the Last Supper, where the 12 apostles and Christ sat down. And so she has that imagery that she's evoking, with each side having 13 placemats, and each one of these placemats is set for a different woman who had an important role in shaping the Western world. And because there's only, well, you do 13 times 3 would be 39, since there's only 39 place settings, that's not a lot of women that are invited to this. And so on the floor here, you can see that she has honorable mentions, people that we couldn't, have a placement set for, but they are important nevertheless. And in each of them, this is Judy Chicago standing next to her work. In each of them, she sets a different place setting specific to that individual. You have Elizabeth Blackwell in the back, or Sojourner Truth just behind Judy Chicago, and each one of them is symbolic of their individual contributions to Western civilization. Here's Judith, which comes from the Apocrypha, the Book of Judith, and freeing the Israelites from Holofernes and his army by mainly seducing him and then cutting off his head to free them. And then you have the contributions of Gentileschi, who we talked about before, who is a Baroque artist, and her contributions to Western civilization. A couple other ones. This one is Sojourner Truth over here, and then you see on the floor here, Mary Shelley. Apparently, she didn't get the part of the top 39, but another individual that's important to the ongoing developments. But again, thinking about Judy Chicago, is the fact that she's focusing only on women. Does that mean that it's only for women, right? If a male artist focused more on men, would that mean that it's only for men, or would we think that it's part of the larger human condition? So again, we need to think beyond those ideas of binaries, that women art is only for women. It's something that can transcend gender and be something for everyone. Cindy Sherman is an artist that focuses on photography. She's best known for her photographs where she places herself in images and reflects the stereotypical roles that women play in the media, such as a mother, a housewife, damsel in distress, seductress, etc., to expose the limited view of women in the media and push for a more complex and accurate understanding of womanhood. She's influenced heavily by the second and third wave of feminism, focusing on identity. And as we remove the male-dominated stereotypical role of traditional femininity, the idea then becomes, well, what are women, right? And she has some interesting ideas here. And what she does is she does these film stills where she gives you a sense, right? So it's just a photograph, but it gives you a sense that it's coming from a film that you perhaps watched, right? So the one in the top left-hand corner gives us the sense of the damsel in distress, the young girl coming into the hard, brutal city, and she's unsure, and now she's going to have to find, I guess, her man to save her, or find some way to overcome her innocence. Over here, we see in the top right-hand corner, we see the domestic Cindy Sherman, who's confined to the stereotypical roles that women within the home. Here's the stereotype of a woman in a library, and then on the bottom we see the stereotypical role of a woman as a seductress. And each one of these images is Judy Chicago, right? So she's the artist, and she's also the star within her works. And I think that's important to understand her art, because she suggests that she too is influenced by these stereotypical definitions, right? She's been watching movies and TV shows all her life. It's hard to not be influenced unless you're living in a bubble. You're going to be influenced by these traditional stereotypes, and so she's suggesting that even though she's pushing for a new understanding, a more complex understanding of womanhood, she also is influenced by them. I think that acknowledging that is part of the discussion. I think it's an important part of the discussion and moving forward. Jablonska it takes a look at the ideas, kind of the next wave, I guess the third, fourth wave of feminism, where we see the challenges that women face when we start to suggest that women can do anything a man can do, right? Getting back to Annie Get Your Gun. They can be CEOs, they can be, career women, not just, confined to the domestic space. She examines that too is complex, and that too is pretty weighty. And what we see here is that women now, that there are more opportunities afforded to them, their expectations are greater. Now they have to not only be, the super career oriented person, they also have to be still the super wife, the super mom, the super everything, right? And so the unrealistic expectations that we have now on women, now that women have more, advancements and freedoms and opportunities, now it also comes with this added baggage of this perfectionism where you have to do everything right. You have to be all things. And now, if women decide to stay at home and focus more on their families and their raising children, now that's looked down upon because they're not career oriented enough. Or the other side of that is that if women, deny their, families and children or whatever, and they go to focus on their careers, then they're not very good people either because they're not, doing their, motherly roles or whatever the case may be. And so uh, she's exposing this idea that women are in this no-win situation, right? You can't, unless you're going to be all things, which that still is a no-win situation. You're going to be upsetting someone, right? Either if you stay at home, you're upsetting some people because you're not career-oriented enough, and if you're going out and being a career-oriented person, then you're neglecting other responsibilities that you have, and so there is no win for women. Where if you think about that in terms of, juxtapose that with men, men can be fathers and they can be career oriented, right? There's no either or. There's no dualistic perspective where you have to do one or the other. And so she's exposing that tension. And then we'll leave off with Jan Haworth, who is interested um, in exploring, similar to Judy Chicago, the important role that women have. And so what she does is she goes to communities, every place that her work of art is in. She has the local community come together, decide which women are going to be celebrated, and then they actually come together and develop the films, the stills of each of these, the stencils, and then they cut them out and they paint them, and so it's more of a work in progress, meaning this is ongoing. Every place that she goes, it's going to be new and adding a new panel, and it's about bringing the community together and talking about the importance of women and how they've influenced Western civilization, and how that is a vital part of understanding the human condition. You can't just study men and what men have done, because then you're leaving out half of the population and half of the insights. And so we need more of a complete, more accurate view. And so we need to examine the contributions that women make. So this will conclude our discussion of feminism and the art and propaganda associated with some of the challenges of identity in terms of gender during the 20th century. And then we're going to take a look at how these ideas are going to now influence other elements of our contemporary life. And so what we're going to be moving to now is focusing more on contemporary issues of art and propaganda, other elements than just necessarily identity, but we'll be taking a look at issues like the environment and contemporary religion and extremism with the September 11th attacks and things of that nature.